Jill here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and I want to talk about Saturn Neptune conjunction and the onset. Because if we are to talk about the Saturn Neptune upcoming conjunction, Sol hour Mercury night, solar Jupiter night, Sun 5 degrees Aquarius. If we are to talk about the Saturn Neptune conjunction, and let's move a second from the mundane. What people are going to really feel this Saturn Neptune conjunction, and those are the people where Saturn and Neptune tell a story in their natal chart. So aside from the people that have significant placements in 0 and 1 degrees Aries, and us 84, 83, 85 that are having our Neptune square, the people that have significant Saturn and Neptune stories in their natal chart are very likely to find that coming chapter or coming year as a significant chapter in the Saturn Neptune natal chart story. By the way, the generation of people born during the last Saturn Neptune conjunction, which is in 1989, 1990, I think to a certain degree even 1988, definitely are striking in each in their own superhuman ability. And a little bit of shout out to Danny Darko Astrology, who posted his first video. This is inhumane. so, so welcome, Danny Darko, to the astrology community. Totally out of this world presentation, accuracy, in-depth skill, and very much in line with the story of Saturn in its home sign, taking the time to really build something and then presenting something that is already the top of the mountain as a first episode. Just amazing. More people that would be affected. So granted that we don't have audience that were born in 1900, whereas Saturn was opposing Pluto. I mean, who knows? Or 1906, 1907, and 1909, where we had the stories of going from the trine to the square to the sextile between Saturn and Neptune. The conjunction, last conjunction, 1917, which historically we remember as the onset of the Great War. And the 1929 was the trine. So the storyline on a mundane level is around the Bolshevik Revolution, the First World War, the Great Depression, the onset of the Nuremberg laws, and of course, at the beginning of the building of the ghettos was Saturn. trine Neptune 1941 and 1942. The end of the war, which was the square. Um, and this is where we're also beginning to have living people. So people born in the 1930s, 1936 in particular, this Saturn Neptune is a chapter in the very natal chart. So being born into the opposition, um, the conjunction is the exact opposite from an opposition. It's a blending of structure and dissolution of structure. Whereas Saturn Neptune opposition is as though we would be taking this blend and polarize it to create um, a 12 o'clock from the structure. It's the structure looking into the dream and the dream looking into the order. And they don't merge, they don't blend. If I think about Nuremberg laws, which was the onset of the 1930s, the financial crisis of 1929 coming to fruition with the opposition, um, basically meeting this season with blending something that one experiences as opposing. Now, it's not the first Saturn Neptune conjunction, definitely not since the 1930s. So you can think back to the 1990s, to 1989, to the fall of the Soviet Union, and similar conjunctions that we had in 1952 or 1953, and think what was happening, which brings me to the people that were born in the 1940s. A little bit of a chronological skip. 1950s, the economy of Germany after the war. The aftermath of Pain-Schulming, which basically meant the depth of the war, and yet the attempt to rehabilitate Germany, so not to leave it in the economy that led to the rise of Hitler, that simply promised work and income, um, and to recover the economy of Germany after, the 1920s, and won the elections. Won the elections. Okay, won the elections. People can talk about how emergency lowness it was. Are we different today? And the looting of the Nazi scientists to get a paperclip. So this was where the paperclips began to do something that that United States is reaping the very unnourishing fruits of today, which means that the Nazi designers began to engineer the facet of United States. So, um, to the people born in the 1940s, um, Saturn and Neptune trine, which means that there was a mythical structure that there was an agreement upon. An isolated Neptune structure, Saturn, to do with labor. Okay, that's basically the concentration camps. and how that agreement between Saturn and Neptune was not so benevolent. Um, okay, just an example of how harmonious aspects on a mundane level are not always so beautiful. So, in this light, the conjunction is a blending of, which is a hard aspect. It's not a harmonious aspect. And what was two parts working harmoniously to enclose becomes the dissolution. So you can think about it as the fall of the inner ghetto. Again, going back to the 1950s and the 1990s and trying to recall how is the coming chapter, which we already opened. Okay, Saturn and Neptune already conjuncted in Aries. We're just going to the year of the for good conjunction. How is this conjunction basically another form of the fall of the inner walls of the ghetto in one's life? Then we go to the people born in the 1950s. Um, Saturn Neptune conjunction. Saturn Neptune conjunction um, and this chapter, because Saturn and Neptune were conjuncting from the 22nd degree of Libra, then going to the retrograde phase. Um, so definitely these two planets agreeing in the little degree um, in the birth chart, if one survived it. because it's very difficult to survive that one, and is not a Nazi scientist that is exterminating the world. Um, this may be um, this is an opposite polarity that inconjuncts closer to the inconjunction of the natal chart conjunction. Um, and one can think how the dissolution of basically global law and trade law, okay, that would be the reinstating of laws or the reinstating of the shilumim, the debt because of the murder or murder because of debt. Um, now the opposite sign dissolves some structures to do not with jurisdiction directly as much as with war strategy, sovereignty, imperial expansion, and trade war rather than trade union. Okay, if Venus is the sign of union, then Aries is the sign of war. So being born to the aftermath of war, to the fall of the previous trade unions and the reinstating of trade unions, meeting the raising of the tariffs and the not the fall of but the spark of war between the global trade system is a very different onset because these people were born at the aftermath of something. So if there are any living people that were born in the 1950s, it would be very interesting to hear of what what they have to say, because I think we have a lot to learn from people that have already seen the aftermath of war, as we are just beginning to argue and fight on currency, trade, BRICS or not, and so on and so forth. Like they've seen where it ends, and perhaps before we begin to fight, um, we should consult the people that were born in the 1950s. As always, we have to sort the wheat from the muck, um, but that's a particular conjunction um, that has seen the aftermath of trade wars. 1959, we have the sextile, um, and this is again a harmony, and I think this one would pertain to the MK Often and MK Ultra and the syphilis experiment. Okay, it's an agreement that created something. This is the onset of the Nazi scientists beginning their work and beginning their yield of fruition of their work under US regime. Okay, that would be the scientists behind the MK Ultra. Um, Hopefully one is not a survivor of MK Ultra, although that can be. Um, and this episode of the conjunction of Saturn Neptune, and again one can go to the 1990s or the 1989, which was the conjunction, the fall of the Soviet Union. Um, and this is where one might see the onset of something that we've seen in the 50s, as well as the, how should I say that, as well as the result of those 1950s project. Um, Many of you may see that if there was prolonged helplessness, many of you might see that it both becomes the implications of your being helpless, basically manifesting in the world, um, and becoming a problem of the masses. And at the same time, there can be some sort of a resolution or closing of a cycle. Again, go back to the 1990s. Um, 1963, Saturn Neptune square. This is a year where um, now I see there's actually a year where Saturn squared Neptune. Um, and that's why I ran into that year, a lot to do with the Cold War. Um, the MK Often, MK Ultra expandable children. Um, so the actual square was February 18, but the entire year went to the back and forth. The assassination of JFK, of course, but um, Wow. The breaking of a dream. And people born in the years of the square, which is also 1945. 1945 was the breaking of the Nazi dream. In 1963, with the assassination of JFK, was, as well as the prevention of nuclear war, this was a year where the timestamp of preventing a world war successfully, as well as the breaking of a dream of world peace, not with the assassination of JFK per se, but with the very partial prevention of global enslavement. The hidden form in which those enslavement took place, the breaking of a dream of people to break free from. Okay, I'm talking about the birth. I'm not talking about somebody's the entire life. Um, and this Saturn Neptune conjunction might be with people expecting the breaking of the dream, particularly after the fact that the fall of the Soviet Union did not yield the fall of the global Peter rings. Okay, and the understanding that, how should I say that? For many of you, you're past your Neptune trine, and past your second Saturn square, which was in Aquarius for the most. I think for all. Um, there is something that is not completely on the radar. Okay, because this conjunction doesn't make a particular aspect with your natal Saturn and Neptune. It's not the sextile. It's not the trine. It's not even the inconjunct. So there's something about this conjunction that is very obviously big, but the expectation is the breaking of the dream. However, there's something that from this vantage point is difficult to predict. Like if I look at it from 1963 timeline onto the Saturn Neptune timeline, I see something that is off the radar. And it can be quite positive. It can be both, but 1966. So the 1966, we already are at the trine. Saturn Neptune trine at 21 degrees, Pisces and Scorpio. And these folks already have Saturn with Chiron co-present. Um, and this Saturn opposes Pluto-Uranus conjunction already. Um, there is something here that first of all, a lot of you are still finalizing your second Saturn returns, and there is also something that is off the radar. Definitely, you're closer to your Neptune trine, and you're closer to your second Saturn return. Um, to finalize the Saturn, you definitely are ready for this or ripe for this transit. But it's not exactly on the radar. What would it yield? And because you have a harmonious, you have an agreement um, in the natal chart, the conjunction is a hard aspect. So again, going back to the 1990s and thinking, where were you then? How were you with those years? Um, because even though it's a different sign, it would be the closest approximate. 1971, 1972. Okay, in your time, there was the experiment with egregores that was only recently declassified, and that was the creation of what people call a tulpa or an egregore that later began to have a life of its own. So the Saturn opposition Neptune, Saturn in Gemini, experimentation with the structure of belief, Neptune in Sagittarius, and whether a belief is real or not, uh, seeing that it does have a manifestation that asks for sacrifice, Neptune, um, and has a certain materialization, Saturn. So this play with structure, play with ritual, Saturn is also ritual, play with the creation of a dream, of an egregore, basically being an experiment. So you folks are way more ripe for this conjunction because what people are going to be confused about, is it real, is it not? You're just going to go by the modus operandi that you've already seen, and that is that even non-real things can become an egregore. When I was talking about reclaiming the egregore 2, 3 years ago for my Spirit of Matter channel, you folks probably were the closest to get what I'm talking about. Although I don't have a particular Saturn Neptune story, I have Neptune in Saturn sign next to my midheaven, um, but it doesn't make an aspect with Saturn, then you folks were probably closest to understand what am I talking about reclaiming the egregore. Because if I invoke the benevolent aspects of the tulpa, then I'm closer to um, just invoking something without um, without a say as to the interaction. Okay, and that can be a deity, a god, an algorithm god, um, all kinds of experiments that I saw with whether people talking about creating servitudes and all those things. In those experiments, they're very technical and very manifesting. Um, so I think that you folks are going to have somewhat easier time tempering with the spirit of the conjunction. Again, go back to the 1990s, and it would be a good time to reflect on what would you do different today when you know Saturn and Neptune are about to conjunct. And for those of you that are really used to um, work with egregores, this particular one might be different because it's a conjunction. 1976, 1977, again the trine, again an agreement, um, and this could be either of the two could be the working with the egregore. This could be the refinement of the work with the egregore. Um, Saturn in Leo, Neptune in Sagittarius. Harmonious agreement, and you folks will have a bit more of a problem with the conjunction because the conjunction is a hard aspect. So again, reference to the 1990s. 1979, the square. So 1979 correlates a lot with 1963. And this is, as well as 1980, this is a story of people expecting the breaking of the dream, consciously or unconsciously. And that could have, both people born in 1979 and 1983 could have gotten or born in a construct of a situation where there is a certain downfall to utopia. And that could have created something very dystopic and a big letdown from an almost utopia, but then not there. For me, it helps me understand these 2 years going through this because I've encountered that it has like it's going to be very benevolent and then expecting something that is going to be the breaking of a dream, expecting something that is going to end up in betrayal, or expecting something. And this is not me saying, oh, this is the expectation that fulfills itself. No, it's a timeline where the world mundanely encountered the breaking of a dream, and and that is something that one cannot ignore within oneself, and there can be attempting to access a different reality, to try to give chance to a different reality, while um, while not really knowing how to keep the benevolence within the dystopian that became reality, and then the miracles that were also adjoined into this type of very weird discussion or friction between the mythical and the concrete. Um, of course, alongside onsets like the Neptune trine, benevolent transits to these benevolent relations with the rulers, those could also be onsets of transcending. And the fact that when Saturn and Neptune disagree, we also don't get the concentration camp. So it's okay, or we have, people, when people are arguing whether to build concentration camp or not, it might be quite malevolent that they even think about it, but quite benevolent because they don't agree. But it can also create a situation where some of you might be thinking, well, when does our prison cell experiment end? And, or alternatively, the mythization of kind of like accepting the situation. Um, but it's not a constant on either way because the constant is the friction. 1982, 1983, we have the sextile coming from the end of Libra to again the end of Sagittarius. Really big on the Mula Nakshatra Neptune. So are the 1980s, but this is this can be a billionaire, a mega billionaire type of years. Um, why am I saying that? Because Neptune is megalithic wealth, Saturn is something that stands the test of time. So some of you might have experienced wealth against all odds, or making it against all odds. Um, you are the generation that just a year afterwards, which is 1984, this would no longer be the spirit of the time. So people born 1982, 1983 could have experienced that their hard work yields. It takes hard work, but it yields. And it yields on a megalithic level. A lot of you are just going towards a lot of you, I'm sorry, are finalizing your Neptune sextiles. And for many of you, y'all might have an island, a beautiful island. Granted, it's not an Epstein Island, um, but for many of you, you might really be seeing the fruits to your labor. Okay, for you, it's kind of like the dream works. Both because that Saturn was in beginning with Spica. Okay, the sextile began with the onset with Spica, and what it very likely creates is some correction of injustice. And when that correction of injustice is done, you are set to something that really does stand the test of time. Many of you could be living in a bubble where you work hard, your life weren't easy, and some of y'all could have gone from rags to riches, also from injustice to justice. Um, but again, this is about an agreement. So if y'all been involved with a lot of injustice, and very likely, if this is the case, you already have corrected that injustice by now and took the losses, because Saturn and Neptune here could be an agreement about the loss because some sort of a karmic accumulation of events. But still, I think that with the grace of Neptune, very likely you could have had a chance to correct those, um, to correct the wrongs, which very likely could have brought megalithic wealth. Um, so some of you there might even have wealth that is ritual abuse free, um, or have the potential to have wealth that is ritual abuse free. So would be very interesting to hear from people in those years. How did they negate Peter Rings? How did they negate the MK Often MK Ultra? Um, and alternatively, some of y'all could have been getting away with certain karma because Neptune is to evade something, and some of you could have evaded taxation. Still, I do think that Saturn returns and Neptune squares um, that were already arising. So you're not in your Neptune sextiles or you're in the Neptune squares, then this could, those of you that have had the chance to get away with things, with the Neptune square, you might see that has an expiration date, or that if you haven't been successful by now because you weren't going with the Peter rings, this could be a crisis of success that will build up to a decade and a half of actually ritually abused Peter ring free wealth. Okay, so those are all opportunities. Then we have 1989, which was the conjunction in Capricorn, 11 degree Capricorn, explosive degree. Okay, I talked about the 11 degrees suicide ideation even. Many of you have explored the themes. For many of you, deprogramming from suicide programming of ritual satanic abuse might be a breakthrough. Okay, the notion that many of you, before applying to, let's say, euthanasia or assisted death, or before committing an act of suicide, people are like, "You're telling me this now?" I'm like, "Well, Falken, I've dealt with similar problems. Okay, um, completely different aspects, not coming from Saturn and Neptune in that particular way, but for many of you, um, before you apply to euthanasia, there is the issue of deprogramming from satanic ritual abuse and exposing the suicide programming around ritual abuse. Um, um, mm, 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 mm. But you folks can definitely explode structures, and you've seen megalithic structures fall apart. You've seen the world changes, and you're holding the frequency of being uncertain that something can happen while it's already happening. Okay? Um, okay, think about the Saturn Neptune conjunction as being uncertain that the miracle can occur when it's already occurring. Um, so now the for you also this Saturn upcoming Saturn Neptune conjunction is off the radar, which means while you may receive premonitions or Neptune Saturn can bring channeling about structure for all the combinations. However, the point where the conjunction happens in the timeline is off the radar from the natal chart. Doesn't mean that you don't have premonitions, just that um, it really is off the radar from. Okay, your original conjunction doesn't see it from a major aspect. It doesn't mean you don't see it in premonition or channeling. Um, and And Mars will still be in Saturn sign. So um, depending on your natal Mars, you may have more or less, and if you're a night chart or day chart, you may have more or less like immediate involvement with the Saturn Neptune conjunction. Things that I've seen happening is the tending to the missing. For example, with Aries, people are going to want an actual person presenting something that is of their own, kind of like not so AI infused. Something that they can count on is original, the original person, and so on and so forth. And a lot of you can predict that and deliver on that. Um, and again, you are the timestamp. You're like a walking talisman of the fall of the Soviet Union due to the corruption that funded the Bolshevik Revolution. So, depending on your take on that, um, you may find yourself more or less already working with the energy. And some of you might feel, um, how should I say that? Some of you might feel, well, oh, well, such a big construct, it cannot fall. But it's already falling now. If you really have an inner calling of your soul to something that transcends the mythical dystopian constraints that are associated with a fall of utopia, you are also the timestamp of that fall of utopia was an emergence of sovereignty. And what looks like the fall of sovereignty to you might be the downfall of utopia that you've already seen not working in the Soviet Union. And it's not seen in the usual form because you were just born. Um, for me, this year that coincides with 1984 so much, it was an invitation to explore the fact that certain events in my life at the time of the time when I was born, the year when I was born, are so significant in everything that I do. Um, so this is pretty much the first big chance because we haven't had a big discussion between Saturn and Neptune. We had a sextile during COVID. We haven't had a big discussion in the form of conjunction. Okay, 1995, 1996, we had the sextile. 1998, the square. 2001, 2002, the trine again. 9/11. 2006, 2007, the opposition. So, ooh, okay. So 2006, 2007, people didn't know what's going on. Now they do. Okay. Um, and those that were counting that people will continue to not know what's going on about something that they partook in 2006, 2007, I wouldn't count on it. I wouldn't count on it. That would be smug to assume that this will continue to be the case. In fact, this is the Soviet Union equivalent fall of those that were smug about whatever they were planning for humanity during the 2006, 2007. 2012, 2013, Saturn Neptune, sextile Neptune ingresses to Pisces. This is what people called kind of like a new wave of people learned about manifestation, about um, the structure of belief, the use of the dream state to manifest something in real life. Again, um, this was an onset that began to break at 2015-16, which was the preparation for the Me Too. This is where the benevolent juncture of the ethereal and the orderly began to be the entanglement of the malefic that would disentangle and become more apparent in 2019. 2019, Saturn also squared from the 18th degree around June. Some of you might particularly remember that this was a year where some incredibly malevolent things were both exposed and practiced. And now we are towards the conjunction. So the people that were smug about whatever was going well with the trine and the sextile will have to surrender the results at the conjunction. Okay? If casting the illusion of the myth of the Soviet Union was ending with the dissolution because the money was funneled to child and human trafficking, and that caused the fall of the Soviet Union, leaving people to question socialism and capitalism at the same. Then the casting of the illusion that was done in um, 2012, 2016, but also, yeah, particularly, but 1995. Okay, the casting of the illusion that, let's say, Bill Clinton can apologize for MK Ultra, MK often, and coup parlay with Epstein at the same time. Okay, the casting of the illusion of the getting away with um, causes the fall of something that is too great to fall without noticing that what didn't work here was not socialism or capitalism alone. Again, this is because Aries is the sign of sovereignty. It's not because of the cycle so much as, for example, if we talk about Capricorn, which was the previous conjunction, this was debt, money going missing, corruption in the utopia. And the focus was on that. Hey, we can't count on the socialist or the communist structure to yield the actual utopia because of corruption and money going missing. Aries is sovereignty going missing. Where did sovereignty go? Um, as classified budgets projects. Classified projects budget. Um, but this time it's not to retrieve money, but to retrieve sense of self. And the collapse is not to retrieve money because money is missing, as happened with the Soviet Union. Money was missing, Soviet Union fell. By the way, for the same reasons, but nobody heard about it. Okay, Elijah only spoke up recently. Now, sense of self is missing. Your sense of self is missing. Where did it go? It's not money that was missing alone. It's a sense of self missing, kind of like, oh wait, with the retrieval of the sense of self, it's like, oh. So they took the sense of self because each and every individual is a wealth source. Oh. And they use sexual violence to do that. So the Epstein Island is not just because they were trading humans, it's because they were siphoning the sense of self of humans to build this kind of big island or real estate empire. And what was used to control, to mind control decision makers was the individual sovereignty and I am and sense of self of each and every individual around the world. So, okay, it's a bigger, it's the fundamentals. 0 degree Aries is the fundamentals. So, the fundamentals of what was undermining sovereignty is due diligence, is in due diligence. And the due diligence is not on money, but on sense of self. And think about Annika Lucas, and she said, when people were questioning her memory, her, I don't know, intentions or whatnot, when she testified on being child sex trafficking survivor for the elite, um, she said, well, with the healing, there is an emerging coherence. Not a falling or a collapse of a narrative, but the gradual forming of a cohesive truth. And with that, an increased sense of self, emotional health, standing in one's power without being overpowering. By the way, Annika Lucas has a second course to the shifting of the power. So I'm not getting dividends for that, but that's something that's very interesting